So I'm very excited today to have Earl Theissen from the Oxford Homes, who's going to share what the homes are about and the value really of sober living, which I've always been a proponent of because I know it helped my daughter so much after her treatment program to go into sober living and to learn more about how to transition into real life. So welcome, Earl.
Thank you, Cathy. Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you came from, I know in your bio, it talked about being homeless and so now you're an executive director. Would you be happy to share some of what led you to this path?
Most certainly. For the most part, I can, now that I'm at a place, I'm 13 years clean and sober, I realize and I can see where the shortcomings were and where the trauma started. And that's, for the most part, was in childhood. I came from a home that, we weren't poor, but we weren't even middle class. So there was a lot of, there was a lot of stuff that we didn't get. There's a lot of stuff that we were watching as kids, everybody have, and I was like wearing the hand-me-downs from my two older brothers. But there was a lot of partying in the house. We heard a lot of violence. I told my dad recently that we heard everything, right? And I believe that's where a lot of the trauma started, was hearing fights, was hearing my parents fight, hearing stuff hitting the walls. It was a pretty violent atmosphere. But through that was my whole upbringing. That was my whole childhood, right? I grew up. I had older brothers, I had friends, but I always felt alone. For some reason that I couldn't. I think it was more of me turning inwards because of all the violence. Like what we got as spankings back then would pretty much be considered child abuse today, right? You don't hit your child with a belt, right, or a metal spoon. But that's. I remember going to school and I couldn't even sit down because I'd be sitting to the side like this because I had a welt or whatever, and that I think is another huge contributing factor to my addiction. Later on, I was sexually abused when I was a young teenager, 14 years old. A direct result of me drinking and passing out, and that I think that was the catalyst for me to basically go. I don't want to say full-blown alcoholic at that age, but where I really turned inward and I didn't share my feelings. I didn't tell my dad about that until probably, I don't even think it was a year ago that I told my dad. About a year that I told my dad that happened. Because I didn't want to. It was bad enough all the stuff that I had put them through from my addictions, but I just didn't want to tell him. I don't even think I told my mom before she passed away what had happened. But after that, I started to mask my pain with drugs. I was doing cocaine. I was doing all kinds of LSD, mushrooms, pot all the time. But I really latched onto the alcohol because it put me in a state of not feeling at all, blacking out, right? It was basically masking my pain, masking my embarrassment, masking my shame. I was a nationally recognized wrestler, senior football team. You don't go talking about being sexually abused to your friends then. Well, I didn't think you would. They all know now. But a lot of that was what led me to. I just couldn't get a handle on it. I couldn't get a handle on my drinking. I never dealt with my shame. I never dealt with any of it. I moved out very young. It was just after my 17th birthday. I moved back to Saskatchewan, and that's when it started getting blackout after blackout after blackout. Right, missing school. It was all downhill from there. But I roofed with my brother for quite a while. Did a few odd jobs here and there in between. Had a couple kids. Uh, was an alcoholic. I identified as an alcoholic then because I couldn't. If I tried to stop, the withdrawals were just too much, and I would just drink by any means possible. I was, stealing from liquor stores, anything to feed my addiction. But that when I was 30 years old, two kids later from different women, and I hadn't spoke to any of them. Right, I didn't speak to either of my kids for 12 years. They came into my life later on once I was getting the help I needed. But my brother had actually dropped me off at. I'd burnt every bridge. So my brother, my oldest brother, who I'm actually his caregiver now, because of situations that he went through regarding alcoholism. He ended up dropping me off at the Calgary Drop-In Center. And I was terrified, 30 years old, just utterly terrified. I walked in, you just see all the homeless people sitting there. And the odd thing is it took me about 20 minutes and I fit in. I had found my group of friends that could relate to me, that I didn't have to hide anything from, because we were all down there for similar reasons, right? So then I had no accountability to anybody. So it was just full blown. I had gotten into crack cocaine. I had gotten into pharmaceuticals. And that was, I'd actually OD'd twice. Taking Seconal, it was called, and drinking hard alcohol with it, and just not stopping. I'd take like 10 of them. And I'd actually woke up on the riverbank by the drop-in center with EMS standing over me with the defib out. And I asked what was going on. I had one shoe on, one shoe off. He said, "We lost you for almost a minute." And I got up and I thanked him and I walked away. And he's going, "Hey, you come back here." And I just waving, still half inebriated, waving at him, saying thank you. And I went back. It's just unreal. And I ended up on the streets for 7 years. I was homeless, sleeping outside for whole winters. I knew where all the warm spots were. I guess you adapt after a while, but that's when I was about a year on the street, and I had gotten charged for trafficking cocaine. It was crack. It was my first adult charge. I got 2 years. Right. So I went into jail again. I was terrified. Again, I fit in. I knew basically everybody that was in there. So it wasn't a shock to the system. It was just, it was almost like my addiction led me to the places where I found comfort, which was on the street where there was no accountability and everybody else had similar stories to mine, and in jail, where again, everybody had similar stories to mine and where I felt comfortable. It was really, really strange, because I know, like, my upbringing, although it wasn't the greatest, that's not the way I was brought up. Nobody's brought up to be homeless or to be an addict. It's just the circumstances that have, and I always say my emotional response to the shame, to the sexual abuse, to the emotional, mental, physical. I just got my status card about 8 months ago. Right, my mom didn't identify as Indigenous. She was. I got all the history now. My grandpa died when he was 29 years old in a farmer's field loading wood. My grandma couldn't raise the kids on her own. There was 7, I believe, and they all got put into foster homes. My mom was 6 years old when she went in there, and I think there was a lot of resentment towards our culture and what had happened. So I suffered spiritual trauma as well, because I didn't have an identity. Look at my oldest brother, and he was dark skinned and everything. He looked Indigenous. And then we got lighter as we went down. But I'm the only one in the family that has my status card. It took me almost 3 years, but that was one of the things in my recovery that I set out to do. But while I was on the street in like I've been through detox 28 times. I've been to treat. The 5th time was the charm for me when I went in. But what led to that was my partner in 2007. I was with her for about 2.5 years on the streets. My partner was murdered in 07 on the streets. She was stabbed on 17th Ave. She's one of the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada or North America. But that was my rock bottom, as we say. It wasn't homelessness. It wasn't jail. It wasn't anything else. It was that experience, the way it happened, the way it all played out. It was just horrible. And I had visuals of my name being up on a homeless shelter door, like they always were, saying "Memorial for Earl Thiessen," because that was what would happen when somebody on the street passed away. They would have a memorial for them, and it would be posted all over the place. And after my last arrest, I'd say Calgary's finest knocked some sense into me, because they pretty much beat me senseless. I got arrested, and I went into the drunk tank. I had 11 warrants for my arrest. I figured I was going back to jail, right? That's quite a few charges. And then I got honest with myself and the JP, the Justice of the Peace, that was on a teleconference from Edmonton. It was like 6 a.m. But I told him, I said, he goes, "You have 11 warrants for your arrest." I said, "Yes, I know." I said, I need help dealing with my addiction issues and the murder of my partner. And he asked her name, and I told him, Jackie Crazy Bull. And he had heard about it up in Edmonton. And I told him I needed to go to treatment. I needed medical detox, because when we went to lay Jackie to rest, I just went into a regular detox center, and I hit the ground and had 2 grand mal seizures and chewed through a third of my tongue. My withdrawals were that bad. But he said, "I tell you what, I'm going to release you on your own recognizance," which never happened before. "And I want you to go get the help you want and need. And I want you to clear up these criminal charges." So that morning, November 13th, 2007, I limped up to Renfrew Recovery Center, and I've been clean ever since. So that's when I speak, I always say, it's that small window of opportunity that a person needs. That, like, all the stars have to align, but that small window of opportunity opened up for me, and I took hold of it. Right. That's actually where, because I developed pre-treatment housing for our organization, which is housing for people that are on wait lists for treatment, because I was on a wait list for treatment then. This was in November. My treatment date was in, I think it was December. So I'd had to do detox and then go out back on the street and hopefully make it back, which what would have happened, I know the routine, I've done it. I would have went out, used until my treatment date was coming, went into detox again, and then went to treatment. And that wait period is where we lose so many people. Right? You get into treatment, you're happy, and then they tell you it's 2 months down the road. What are you going to do? You're going to go back to an unsafe environment, right? You're going to go back to a horrible relationship. But that's when I took hold of my life. I held myself accountable for my part in all this. I know that a lot of this stuff wasn't my fault, but it took me a long time to realize it, right? It's stuff that happened, circumstances that happened. Like I didn't get hit like my dad got hit, and it's almost that intergenerational thing that carries on, right? So I just had enough of tucking my emotions down, stuffing them away, and not facing them. And it was torture. It was painful. I went through. It took me about 6 months to forgive myself because the last things I said to Jackie weren't very nice, right? We got in an argument and I said, you know what? I'm going to my brother's, stay down here. And then I said some stuff I don't want to repeat, but it took, when I went down to apologize to her, that's when her cousin came up to me crying, telling me that he's sorry. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I said, well, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm sorry. I couldn't save her. And I said, what are you talking about? And that's when he said, Jackie's dead. And I just hit the ground. You know, I didn't even, took me 6 months to be able to apologize to her through prayer, through my culture, right? To know that she understands. And that's really when all my healing started to take place. That's when I talked about the sexual abuse for the first time in, what, geez, 22 years. That's how long it festered inside. And I went in, I did a step 5 with an elder, a female elder, and it was 2.5 hours of crying, basically. I just unloaded. I cleaned out my closet. I'd been through treatment enough to know that if you hold on to any of your trauma, there's a good chance you're going to relapse again. You're going to use that as the excuse to go out and use, and I didn't want that. I'd had enough. When I was in detox, I'd had enough. I'm not going out this way. This isn't the way that Creator put me. He didn't put me here to die on the streets, a homeless man, right? Nobody is meant for that, but a lot of us don't come to that conclusion, and a lot of us won't face ourselves and our trauma. It's really painful. I've cried so much in my recovery due to my trauma. It's just unreal, but it's almost cleansing for me. I can feel the weight. Even speaking with you now, I feel better speaking about it, right? It's just, as a man, nobody wants to talk about sexual abuse, but as a man, it seems harder for us because I've talked to lots of men that have went through the same thing, and I share a bit of my story with them so they know that it's okay to talk about, right? There's a lot of shame with abuse and intergenerational trauma, I guess you could call it. It's a lot of shame, and it just compounds. But when I was in detox, a young lady, Gwen, who worked at Sunrise Healing Lodge and Alpha House Detox, I spoke with her, and I was honest with her. I said, I don't think I'm going to make it to my treatment date if I get released out of here. I need to get to treatment from detox. That gap is going to kill me. She said, Earl, let me make a couple phone calls and I'll see what I can do. She called me a few hours later and had got me into Sunrise. It was 4 days after I made the phone call to her, she had me into treatment. And that was another small window that opened up for me that I took advantage of. I did long-term treatment in there. I did the, the 6-week treatment. And then I did the 12-week treatment. And then I did the 9-month living sober program. And that's when I was in long-term treatment, and that's when I went into an Oxford house because I wasn't going back to the street. I couldn't go back to my brother's house because he was in active addiction still, right? So I went into an Oxford house, and that's when my life started to change before then, but that's where I knew I was safe, right? They had 4 other men around me that were in recovery, that were striving for the same things that I was. And it just made it a lot easier. It was like I had a sponsor right there, horrible, right there with me. I could do a little AA meeting just by speaking with somebody, right? So the peer support model that we provide played a huge part in my recovery. And it was an Indigenous men's home that I was in. When I moved in, it wasn't the best situation. There were 2 brothers, a cousin, and their uncle was drunk, sleeping on the couch downstairs. And all in about 48 hours, when they knew that I was there to recover, everybody left except for one person. He stayed and finished his pipe fitting. But I was alone in that house for almost a month after he left. And that's when I started cleaning the house, clean the carpets. I made it my home, like my counselor then said, because when I first moved in there, I said, I'm not moving in there. The place is filthy. There's a drunk guy on downstairs. And my counselor said, God rest her soul, she passed away since. But she said, Earl, make that house your home. Go back there and make that house your home. It doesn't matter what the people in there are doing. Make it your home. So that's what I did. And I stayed in there for 14 months. Actually, one of my, two of the guys that I was on the street with had come into that house a few months after I moved in. And one of them is, he's my best friend now, Roger. He was best man at my wedding. He's Uncle Roger to my kids. That's the type of relationships that you build inside one of these homes. But I changed the way that house operated, the way it ran. The founder, Ron McMillan, God rest his soul, he passed away about 6 years ago too. But he talked to my now wife and had asked her if I'd be interested in working at Oxford House. So I said, yeah, definitely. I was working at In From the Cold, a homeless shelter for families that I'd been clean about a year. About 16 months. But he offered me the position, and I grabbed a hold of it. That was my whole reasoning to get into the service sector, was to get into the addictions and mental health. So I took that job, and I was a support worker, and then I was Indigenous support worker. Then I was the housing supervisor, and I was housing manager, I was program manager, director of operation, and now I'm executive director, all in 10 years.
Well, that's quite a story. Yeah, I can see, and I appreciate you sharing how the trauma really was the catalyst to turn to the substances and stuff. So, wow, what a journey you've been on. So, can you tell us a little bit, Earl, about what the difference is between Oxford House and maybe other sober livings? I mean, how is the model different? And why is that so successful? Because it just seems like it's a successful program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the big thing that Oxford House Foundation of Canada stresses on is peer support. You have like-minded individuals. We don't move people into houses. We don't just take an application and say, okay, here you're going in this house. That's not how it works. It's not how it works in the States either. The residents of the house do the interviews, and they decide if the person moves in. Right? And that's the first step to the house knowing that they decide who their roommates are. Right? It's their home. We just oversee the operation of it. And I let them know that. Right? In every house, there's accountability in the house. You're accountable to yourself for your actions. 2, you're accountable to all your roommates. And at any time, and they can sit down and say it was me, and say, hey, Earl, we're having a house meeting here. You need to attend it. We're going to give you a disruptive behavior because you're not hitting your recovery meetings. You're not cleaning your room, and you're not doing your chores. So here's a disruptive behavior contract. You have 30 days to change those behaviors, or we're going to have to ask you to leave. And that's the way it works. The house has control. There's a president in every house. There's a secretary in every house. There's a chore coordinator in every house. Well, what else is there? There's the safety supervisor in every house. Everybody has a responsibility to each other in that home. And that's what makes it successful. You become a family. You work together. There's houses that have been, like when I was in my house, for the last 8 months of me being in there, it was all the same people. All the same people. Everything just gelled. We were like a well-oiled machine, right? We would go out to meetings together, or some of us would go together, others would go to different meetings. But we were all accountable to each other. We all kept an eye on each other, and we didn't hesitate to call somebody out, right? And now I tell everybody, I said, if something in your house is not getting done chore wise, don't go to the person whose chore that is. Go to the chore coordinator, because that's his responsibility to you guys, is to make sure that everybody's doing their chore, right? So the level of accountability and the peer support, like I said, you have 4 people around you that are going through the same thing, men or women, and you have a sponsor right there. You can have, we instill weekly house meetings so people can sit down, discuss what's going on in the house. If there's an issue, you bring it up. It's a safe place to bring it up. Sometimes a support staff member gets called into a house meeting so they can, we don't interfere or anything with the house. They sit there, and if they are asked for help, then they'll give their input.
Okay. It sounds like a great, I think the cooperative model sounds, super helpful, and everyone's part of it. Everyone's making decisions and has responsibility. So, and then final question, I have parents who, and just in sober living or recovery homes in general, I have parents who'll say, oh, I don't want to send my child there because there's drugs and alcohol, or they're going to go, they're going to be around these people that are, so, and I'm, like I said, I'm a big proponent of it because I think it's just a nice, helpful transition. And I think people need support for a longer period of time. But what would you say to parents who have a concern about going to an Oxford home or going to any home, even if it wasn't an Oxford home, just sober living in general? What would you say as far as the benefits of it?
The benefits are, a parent, this is just my opinion, a parent can do more harm to a child by not loosening the reins a little bit, right? Our children, my son is in recovery. Our children we can't hold their hands the whole time, right? I'd like to say in every recovery home there isn't drugs or alcohol, but it's recovery. People do relapse. And that's why they're asked to leave the house as soon as it's found out. But it was the best decision I made in my life. It was the best decision my son made. I've witnessed thousands of people change their lives with recovery housing. And it's once they're in there, they get comfortable, they develop those friendships with people that have 1, 2, 3, 4 years clean and sober. And that's a mentor for them, right? It's really difficult to understand the addicted mind if you haven't been there, right? There's only so much you can teach a person about addiction. There's the underlying issues that lots of people won't even tell you. I didn't tell my dad about my sexual abuse until a year ago. That was 21 years. So there's stuff in there that a resident, say my son, will tell his roommate that he won't tell me, because the roommate's sitting down and he's going, I'm having a really hard time. I was physically abused when I was growing up, and I don't know how to deal with it. And I'm getting scared that I'm going to relapse. And then your roommate says, you know what? I've been there too. This is what I did. Get a sponsor, go to meetings, speak openly, right? By not speaking, you're hurting yourself. But the best thing that I did for my son was let him be and let him learn himself, right? And now him and his girlfriend own a pizza truck out in Ontario, right? There's no issues with his DOC, which was crystal meth, at all. And that's a direct result of him having the opportunity. The guys in the house would tell me about what he was doing, but I would never go there and say, you can't do this. I heard you're doing, that's not my job, right? I let him carve his own path. And I know his parents were really protective of our children, but sometimes you have to let them experience some of their own happenings and grow on their own without our input. Because in recovery, that's the best thing that happened to me. It's not a scary situation if the housing is proper, right? I still visit my houses, well, our houses, I call it mine. But I still visit the houses. I still talk to the residents. They have my undivided attention with anything that's going on there because I've been there and I've done that. And I want to help people heal. And it's not work for me. This is a blessing. This is a gift. 14 years ago, when I was sleeping under a bridge or sleeping on a homeless shelter mat, did I ever think that I would be the executive director of Canada's largest peer-supported recovery housing organization? Right? Never in my wildest dreams. So I just love what I do, and I love spreading awareness. Right? Do research on the houses. It's so easy to Google. Right? Everybody's got access. Right? Find out who the staff are. Google their names. Right? Google the organization's name. There's so and go through the pages and read. Look at the reviews. Right? I'll guarantee you, there is no 5-star recovery housing out there, because you get a lot of bitter people that have to be removed for the safety of the other residents that know they can go on there and put a bad review and it's going to hurt you. But you look at the majority of the reviews and then you decide.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. I know I feel the same way, that, you know, doing the research, and, you know, you have to check. I mean, definitely there's some houses, you know, and not necessarily in Oxford, but in general, there's houses that are better than others. So yeah, you just have to do your research. So Earl, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I'm really glad you were able to join me today. So thank you. And
thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.